Hello everyone, my name is Joshua Dragonpillow, and if you followed me for any amount of time, you know that I play Fire Emblem. Yeah, I think that's accurate. I have a lot of friends, and by a lot of friends I mean a few people who I vaguely know over the internet. I have a lot of those people, and I want them to play Fire Emblem, because it's my favorite series of all time, and whatever. However, there's a lot of games, and I find that it's difficult to say, hey, you should play Fire Emblem, and then they'll be like, okay, and then they won't actually play it, because there's like plenty of games to choose from. They're like, I don't know which ones to start with, because there's like 16 of them, and I'm like, I get it. But that brings up the question, where should you start as a first-time player in the series, in a series of 16 games, mind you? Is it 17? Do we count Warriors? This video won't be counting Warriors, nor will it be counting Tokyo Mirage Sessions, because those games are not Fire Emblem, despite having Fire Emblem in the name. Don't worry about those games. Oh, we also don't count Heroes either, because that game's also doesn't count, because it's a gacha game. But excluding those games, I think there's 16. Yeah. So of the 16, that's a lot of games. Where would you start? Well, for the purposes of this video, and my mostly English audience, I'm going to be cutting out all of the games that are not naturally available in English. Those games are Fire Emblem 2, Fire Emblem 3, Fire Emblem 4, Fire Emblem 5, and Fire Emblem 12. All of those games are only available in Japan, and while you could download the game and also a patch for it, that's too much effort for your first time. I mean, it's probably not, but some people would say that. So let's maybe not for those on your first time. So that's cool. We've already cut our odds down from 16. Oh, what is that? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12. That's 6 games. Alright, cool. We're down to 10. Easy. Look at that. We're down to 10 games-ish. That's pretty good. And then we have to add 3, because Fates is divided into 3 games. So it's really 13, but hey, that's better than 16. So we're going to be talking about... We have to go through the list. Fire Emblems 1, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 13, 14, Fates. Fates is divided into 3 games, those being Birthright, Revelations, and Conquest. And then we also are talking about Echoes and 3 Houses. So that is, I think that's 12 games. That's either 12 or 13 games. I can't count anything above the numbers of 10. So, yeah, that number. However, before I talk about the individual games, I should talk about the criteria of what makes those games good for beginners. And to start, we have to define the beginner player. A beginner player is someone who's never played the series before, knows absolutely nothing what they're doing, and has a vague concept of the game because somebody told them it was vaguely similar to chess, and they vaguely know how to play chess. That's your beginner player, more or less, with some varying degrees of how well they know the game chess, right? That's pretty much it. This means that they're not going to be good at the game, and that's fine. You're not supposed to be in your first time playing, and that's okay. But that's essentially the gimmick. That's what a beginner player is, at least in my eyes. They're someone who isn't going to be necessarily playing inefficiently, but they're not going to be someone who's like, oh yeah, I've got to complete the map in 3 turns, and I'm like, every single time, and I'm like, no you don't. There's someone who wants a fun, enjoyable experience as their first iteration in the game, and all that. So we need to tailor the games that we choose as the best to start with to fit a beginner's mindset. And how do we do that? Well, I have 4 criteria for what makes a Fire Emblem game good, specifically for beginners. But what are those criteria? Well, I'm glad you asked me. That's so dumb. I'm gonna cut that out. Okay. A Fire Emblem game for being good for beginners falls under these 4 criteria. 1, it needs to be a good game in general. 2, it needs to be an easy game. 3, the mechanics in the game should be close enough to the rest of the Fire Emblems that they could go to any other game in the series if they wanted to. And 4 is everything else, more or less. To delve into those a little easier, a little more in depth, it needs to be a good game because nobody wants to play a bad game as their first introductory into the series. A good game is one that's complete, both story-wise and, more importantly, gameplay-wise. If your gameplay isn't fun, players won't want to play it. And if your story isn't concise and coherent, players won't be invested. You need to have at least some degree of ability for both, preferably a good amount. But as long as it's good enough, I'll let it slide. It's story-wise. The gameplay needs to be the gameplay, and typically that's not a problem. It needs to be easy. This is because new players are garbage. You know, it's true. Some old players are garbage too, but new players are very garbage. And they're gonna not know what they're doing. So the game needs to be easy, so no matter what they end up doing and how bad their level ups are and all the other factors, they can still play the game and still be able to make it through. At the very least, beatably, even with a few not so great situations. But it can be done, right? They don't, but I'd like to think that players are smart, though, as well, even new ones who've never played. I think an easy game is one that doesn't necessarily hold their hands really hard, but also doesn't, kick in their faces with complete BS. You gotta straddle that line, which is really hard to do, and there's not many games that really do that. But I think the easy modes in most games, I think, straddle that line pretty well, or at least that experience for a first-time player will feel that way. Next, you have transferability, which is how this little factor is how well the gameplay features in the game exchange to other games. If you play a game which has like 100 mechanics, and then you go to play a game that only has 25 of those 100 mechanics, it's a little weird to play it, because that's the way it is. This typically happens over time, right? Like, the newer games will have more mechanics than the previous game. Some of those newer mechanics kinda aren't necessary, and they can blend out and blend in to older games' mechanics, and they're not that important. But some of them are, very important, and those are the ones that create issues, which we'll talk about a few of those in particular as we progress. But typically the general rule is if you have a lot of features that are only in your game and not in any of the other games, or only in one other game, you're probably not going to be a great game to start with, because it's going to be more about those mechanics and less about core gameplay of Fire Emblem, if that makes sense. And then the last one is my catch-all tool for everything. Really, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't get covered in the 3 that do make an impact, and this is my catch-all for all of them. There's a few, I don't think... most games don't really have anything that falls into this category that I think is important, but there is one, and that's being a sequel, and then there's another one, which is availability. I don't think that these are super duper important, but they are factors that will raise or lower a game as necessary. So let's start. We're going to start from the worst to the best in terms of game. And the worst game is Fire Emblem Fates Revelations. This is Fire Emblem 14. Yeah, Fire Emblem 14-3, I guess is what you'd call it in number form. Revelations has a few key issues. One, it's not very enjoyable to play through. It's one of the only Fire Emblem games that I'd say... Well, like, I mean, assuming that you like the mechanics of Fire Emblem, even this game, you're gonna be like, I don't know about this one. There's a lot of... They throw a lot of weird stuff at you. This is fine. Inherently, it's not a problem. But, like, I'm not trying to shovel snow. If I wanted to shovel snow, I could shovel snow in real life, you know? I ain't trying to do it in-game. What is this? There's just a lot of stuff like... That's just one example. That's not a joke. They actually make you shovel snow in this game. But so it's very... A lot of stuff like that that's just weird. Not necessarily bad on their own. Like, if you want to do that for a chapter, that's fine. The problem is when you start, you know... Every chapter's got it. Gotta have something. In addition... the game's not super easy, actually. It's really obnoxious to play through. Because, you know, you gotta shovel snow, and then the snow reveals enemies, then you're like, but I already moved my characters. Oh no, I guess I just lose. You know. And it's a lot of stuff like that. It's a lot of waiting around, which leads to boring gameplay. Then the enemies are actually kind of tough sometimes, even on the easy normal mode. Does that game have an easy? I don't think that game has an easy mode. But even on, like, normal mode, it's pretty tough. Plot-wise, it's supposed to be played after Birthright and Revelations. So it's almost like a sequel. So that sucks. Not very good plot-wise for your first experience either, because it's designed to be played after 2 other games. So that's not good. Also, the plot itself is just not good in general. Even if you have or haven't played the other 2. It's just dumb. So, you know, you got a bad plot. You have awkward gameplay at best. I cannot recommend this to someone who's first starting out. I think this game's not good for a first starting run. Next up is Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn. It hurts me so much to put this game as low as I do, because this is probably my favorite game in the series, but it is a sequel. It is a sequel to Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, and there's quite a few story beats that are not really going to make sense if you haven't played Path of Radiance first. There's a lot of character dynamics that you miss if you haven't played Path first. There's a lot of stuff like that, which means you're not going to get the full, complete experience of Radiant Dawn without playing Path of Radiance. So that's a thing. In addition, this game is really hard. Like, it's really hard. Like, it's really hard. I think when it comes to easy modes of any of the games that came out in English, I think this game has the hardest easy mode of all of them. Not counting Fire Emblem 5, because that game didn't come out in English. And Fire Emblem 6, because that game also didn't come out in English. But not counting those two, this game has the hardest easy mode in the series. So that's a thing. So if you wanna challenge, yeah, this would be it. It's really hard, and because it's really hard, because of the story beats, I think I can't recommend it. This game also does a few weird things. This is part of that transferability problem. It does supports differently than every other game in the series that has supports. The game is broken up into a part system as its main thing. This isn't super bad, but it does mean that you're swapping characters around quite a bit. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. Other games do that all the time with, like, I don't know. Do other games do that? My first thought was Sacred Stones did it in Chapter 5X, but that was the only time it did it. But, like, it's not unheard of, but they do it a lot, so that's a thing. You kind of swap around a lot, which in most games, you really just have your one core group. So those are a few things that are different in Radiant Dawn that are not in any other game. Revelations had stuff that's different and unique to the Fates series, and we'll talk about them when we talk about the other Fates games. Don't think they don't, just because I didn't mention it. They do. But Radiant Dawn, it's a sequel. It's really hard. Don't play it for your first time. But it is okay. It's a great game. And by great, I mean, I really like it. Some people don't, but they're wrong. Next we have, Conquest. Fire Emblem Fates Conquest. So this game kind of, it's got some issues. But I wanna give an anecdotal story for this one. When I was playing my Fire Emblem 11 run back on stream, like that was a while ago. But when I did one earlier this year, right? I had a viewer who came on, and we talked for a bit while I was waiting around for all the ballistas to shoot out their ballista bolts, so I could progress through the game safely. And we were talking, and he talked about he was playing Fire Emblem for his first time, and he picked up Conquest, Fire Emblem Fates Conquest. And I guess I never realized how difficult that game was, but when he started talking about it, and oh my god, a new player is not prepared to play this game. This game is designed heavily in mind, map design-wise, like level design, is designed heavily in mind of veteran players. And that player who'd never played before experienced this firsthand in his first time. He got rocked on chapter 10. We're not even halfway in, and my man literally already getting slaughtered. It's bad. Like, it's bad. It's bad. Like, he's on normal mode, and he's, like, losing on, like, turn 4. And it's like, what? But that's how hard this game is. And I get it. Chapter 10 is really tough, and it doesn't only go up from there. It's kind of like Chapter 10 is like a level spike in terms of difficulty. It's a difficulty spike, for sure. But it's really tough. And you gotta, like, know what you're doing, or else you will get bodied. You know? This is where we're going to talk about some of, Conquest's unique features, or unique-ish features, those being pair up. Pair up is a mechanic that's available only in Awakening and the Fates games. It's a mechanic where you can have 2 units occupy one space to give the main unit extra bonuses in terms of stats, and also allows them to not get hit twice by attacks, and sometimes can protect them from main attacks as well. It's got a lot of nuance to it, especially in the Fates version. And for the most part, it's not a necessarily bad mechanic. It is only available in Awakening and the Fates games. It never returns since, and was not in it before. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but in Conquest, you really have to make great use of pair up and its mechanic in order to get through it. Because, like I said, the game is very difficult. You need to use all of your tools to the best of their ability to get through. This isn't a bad thing. This is actually pretty good game design, forcing you to use your tools to your advantage to win and really test your strategy, which is good game design. The problem is, a new player doesn't have the brain to make all of those decisions properly yet, because they've never played the game before, or a previous game before, or a similar game before. They're not going to really understand and how to maximize all their tools. And that's what leads Fates, Conquest in particular, and to a lesser extent Revelations, to be very challenging for new players. Because it really requires the maximization of everything, from your units to how you place your units, to even the prep screen. It's super tight on money, you know. as well, you're like really limited in how much money you get. And that's everything. That's everything in the game is like that. And that's not a problem. It's just the way the game is. But it's a problem for beginners because they're not ready to handle all that. That's the thing, and I know that firsthand because I've had someone tell it to me. Fates also has a mechanic, is a game difficulty mode called Phoenix mode. I haven't really talked about game difficulty. In general, there's two. It's either classic mode or it's casual mode. Classic mode has units die at the end. It has units die not at the end. Well, I mean they can die at the end, but when a unit dies in classic mode, they don't come back. They're dead. They're dead forever. There is no retreat. There is no saving. They are gone. There is nothing you can do except for close your game and restart if you want them back. Starting from Fire Emblem 12 onwards, they introduced classic mode. Classic mode has the ability to make it so if your unit dies, they will be back in your base or your starting area at the start of the next battle, and they will be totally fine, as if they were never harmed at all. So you have that. That's classic mode. They will leave for the rest of the battle, but they will return for the next one, and they will just retreat. Fates has Phoenix mode. All three Fates games do. I'm not going to really reference it for the other two, because they're really not at all necessary, because they're not that hard. But in Conquest, Phoenix mode, you may be tempted to go to Phoenix mode. Phoenix mode is when all characters come back at the start of next turn. Because no other games have Phoenix mode, I highly recommend for you not to play on this if you start with one of the Fates games, which I don't recommend inherently. But if you do, please don't play Phoenix mode. It's awful. It takes out any strategy that's ever existed in the games. So please don't. It's not good. So that's a thing that you'll have to be aware of. And in Conquest is hard enough that a new player can lose while having Phoenix mode on. I know that sounds crazy, but that's how ridiculous the game is. But beyond Conquest's incredible difficulty in being designed for a player who's already played most of the games in the series, it has one other key difference, or key problem, that really keeps it away. And that's that the story is complete garbage. This game's story is straight up crap. There is no coherence. There is no sensibility. The general gist is like, oh, I'm gonna go with my birth family to try and improve them from within, and then she just proceeds to kill everyone. Thanks. That's the whole plot. And I don't have a problem spoiling it because you're not gonna play it. You are gonna play it maybe, but you'll be like, there's no way he's right, and then you play it and then you're gonna be like, oh my god, this game's stupid. Cause it is. It's so bad. It's so bad. It's awful. It's really bad. Just skip all the cutscenes. That's how I do it. But general just story sucks. Really hard. Don't play for your first time. Give it 8 games and then maybe. This game's really hard. Is this game harder than Radiant Dawn on normal mode? As opposed to Radiant Dawn's easy mode? They're probably about the same. I'm gonna give a slight edge to difficulty to Radiant Dawn. Conquest difficulty is mostly BS, as Radiant Dawn difficulty is mostly actually well-placed enemies that cause a lot of issues. Except in Part 4, where it's BS. And that ends our first tier. That ends our bottom tier game. So now we have our second tier of bad games. You shouldn't start with these either, but there's more of a case that you can make. There's more upside to these games. And the first one here is Fire Emblem Three Houses. Some of you are currently being like, what? Three Houses is not a good game to start with, but it looks so cool, and it's got all this stuff in it, and it's on the Switch. And I'm like, I get it. All those things are true. But the problem is, it has too much stuff in it. This game has everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. It's got battalions. It's got the monastery. It has teaching. It has character locked spells. It has combat arts. It's got divine pulse. This thing has everything. It has gauntlets. Do you know what other games have gauntlets? None of them. It's got everything. And that's fine for making a complete individual experience. It's not fine for starting a series. If you only intend to play Three Houses, and you never intend to go backwards at any point in time in the series at all, or potentially forwards, depending on the next real Fire Emblem game we have, you might not want to start with this one. Because it's going to be very different when you play any other game in the series. Because they're all so different than this game, and it has so much. You get used to this, and then you'll be like, wait, where are my gauntlets? Where's my divine pulse? Where are my combat arts? I can't teach my people? What is this game? This isn't Fire Emblem. But no. The real thing is that Three Houses isn't Fire Emblem. I do like Three Houses-ish. It's not my favorite game. It doesn't feel very Fire Emblem-y to me. But it is fun to play. It's fun to route through. It's fun to abuse. And it's definitely an enjoyable experience for people. And I think it can be. It's a great casual experience as an individual game. But it's killed by transferability. Because there is so much in this game that it makes it incredibly janky when going in any direction, forward or backwards, I fear. We obviously don't know about forwards yet, because we haven't had the next real Fire Emblem game, but definitely backwards. So if you ever want to play, the Fates games, or Path of Radiance, or the GBA titles, or Radiant Dawn, which we talked about, then maybe you shouldn't start with this one. Just because it's so different than every other game, and it's going to be really strange. It's way easier, in my opinion, to go from not having stuff to having stuff, and taking away things that you're already used to is a little strange, especially in a game that's supposed to be similar in design, since they're all in the same series, and all considered main titles and not spin-off. So next up, we have Fire Emblem Fates Birthright. This is our last Fates game, and really it's higher than the other two, because the gameplay is easier. It's not even more interesting, it just is easier. It's actually arguably, it's way more boring than Conquest is. Its story makes more sense than Conquest's, but it's still not great. It's a very mediocre game as a whole. But it is a lot more Fire Emblem than like Three Houses is, and it is also really easy, just like Three Houses is. So you can totally get away with it in terms of difficulty and have like a decent time through it. But the story is really bad. It's really bad. Like, it's really bad. It's not as bad as Conquests or Revelations, but yikes. And it just isn't very enjoyable to play through. Every map kind of starts to feel samey as you progress. And then there's like a little bit of a level spike at the end. And then the game's over. So I don't know, I'm not a super big fan. It's got all the same problems that I talked about with, you know, Conquest. It's got your Phoenix mode. It's got pair up. It's got this one also has the ability to grind. We haven't talked about that yet. Technically, Three Houses has it too, but it's somewhat more warranted in that game. Grinding is the ability to spend time outside of levels to make your units better, in terms of fighting to make them stronger and obtain level ups. A lot of games, particularly older ones in the series, don't have the luxury of grinding in it. The newer games do, mostly, except for Conquest. The newer games have grinding, the older games don't. So that's something that you should be aware of. Grinding really started to be a thing in Awakening, and it existed prior in Sacred Stones, but all the other older games don't have it in that sense. So that's a thing to be aware of. And that's going to take us, that's the end of the second bottom tier, the slightly better bottom tier, as we move on to tier 3. And our first game in tier 3 is Fire Emblem Echoes Shadows of Valencia. Echoes is a fantastic game. Like, really, it really is. I love this game. It's some of the best presented Fire Emblem has ever been in the entire series. It's beautiful. It's pretty. It's actually looks better than Three Houses does often. It's a very unique, it's a fun and interesting experience, and I recommend to Fire Emblem fans and non-fans alike, because it's just a really good game. So why is it this low? And the answer is the same issue that Three Houses has. It's higher because it's overall a better game, more enjoyable to play from, and is significantly more transferable in terms of mechanics to the other games in the series. But it still has the same core problems. There's a lot of things in Echoes that don't exist in the other games. And I guess just to list them off real quick, these all come off the top of my head. We have a walkable overworld map, overworld reinforcements, dungeon crawling, very awkward promotions. The promotions in this game work differently than they do in most of the games in the series, so that's a thing. No weapon triangle, which also doesn't exist in Three Houses, but it has combat arts, which only exist in this game in Three Houses. So it's got a lot of stuff that exists only here, or only in a few games. That's not all of them. Oh, it has fatigue. I forgot about fatigue. But it's got all that. Just you know, off the top of my head. But like, and it's okay. I like it enough. You know, it's a really good game. It's very fun. And it's very fun experience. It's a little tough towards the end. I'll give it some credit. It's a little tough towards the end, but for the most part, it's easy enough. It's fun enough. It's great story. Pretty to look at. It's got all that. So like, definitely a game you can start with, and no one's gonna say anything. But it's going to be strange going backwards. If you go to Three Houses after this game, I actually think it transfers pretty well. Three Houses, in many respects, actually build off Echoes. So that's a thing. Next, we have Fire Emblem Awakening. I have a love-hate relationship in this game. But for the most part, I think it's fine. I think it's a fine game. It has a really strong opening, with its great level design. You know, its opening levels are super good, and it has a unique enough ability for yourself and unique enough reasoning for why your main character is where they are. And it's got some great writing and some of the best character interactions in the entire series. And it really is the best casual experience I think Fire Emblem's ever had. I mean, except for maybe Echoes. Echoes might be slightly better. Just because Echoes is so pretty. But Awakening's got a lot of stuff in it. And it's more normal Fire Emblem than Echoes is. So it's got that going for it. The problem with Awakening, it's got a similar problem to Echoes, but in reverse. The problem with Echoes is that it has too many mechanics that aren't anywhere else. The problem with Awakening is that it has one mechanic that's incredibly strong. Like, really, you need to use and abuse it in order to make it through the game, and that's Pair Up. We mentioned Pair Up briefly in Fates, but I want to make this clear. Fire Emblem Fates' version of Pair Up and Awakening's version of Pair Up are different Pair Ups. Fates' version is a lot more toned down, a lot more fluid, and makes a lot more sense in terms of a mechanical standpoint, in terms of how they explain it. In Awakenings, it's just busted. Like, it's just absolutely broken. To the point where there is, under no circumstances ever, you would not want to be paired up with someone else. You always want to be paired up. Always. With, like, maybe one exception early on where you want your healer separate so they can heal whichever pair they need to. But, like, other than that, you want everyone paired up constantly. Because it's just busted. You get stat bonuses, you get the ability to attack twice, you get to randomly defend yourself from any and all attacks. It's absolutely insane. It can do everything. And it does everything. And that's fine. But the problem is, when you're so used to Pair Up doing everything, going backwards or forwards, when Pair Up doesn't do everything anymore, it's like, how do I even play the game? I'll Pair Up. What do I do? It's such a centralizing mechanic that it's actually impossible to play the game without this mechanic on the higher difficulties. I think you could get away with it on normal, but it's so powerful. It was so powerful that they nerfed it into the ground in Fates, and it was still a dynamic and dominant feature in Fates. But oh my god, in Awakening it's just insane. It's so wild. And you know, I played Awakening as my first game. And then I went backwards and I played the other game. I played Sacred Stones. Sacred Stones is, like, notoriously easy. Like, everyone's like, Sacred Stones is... I don't actually think Sacred Stones is the easiest game in the series, but the majority of people will say that. And I literally gave up. It was too hard because it didn't have Pair Up in it. And I didn't know what I was doing. So I gave up on Sacred Stones because it was too hard. That was my second Fire Emblem I ever played. Because I was so reliant on Pair Up. And I wasn't smart enough to realize and abuse what I had and the mechanics of Sacred Stones. Because I was so reliant on Awakening. I was so reliant on Awakening's casual mode. I was so reliant on Awakening's supports. I was so reliant on Awakening's Pair Up. Mostly Pair Up. It's crazy how powerful it is in comparison. There's never been a mechanic like it again in the series. And there's a reason. There's one that's vaguely similar in in Three Houses, called Adjutants, but they're severely weaker. Like, I would make the case they're not even the same. But it's wild. This game also has a heavy focus on supports. Fates does this too, although in Fates has so many other significant problems that I didn't even touch on it, and that's supports. Awakening is very dominated by supports, in a way that most of the games in the series prior to this point weren't. Future games, I guess, are. The games now, with the exception of Three Houses is really heavy on supports. With the exception of Echoes, supports have been really important in the series, but never more than in Awakening, where the game is heavily reliant on you to support with your first group of characters, so that way they will marry off, because the stat bonuses you get from having that S support and being married is crazy. Also, it leads to paralogs, which typically have recruitable units behind them, so you do need to actually do this. if you want any characters in the second part of the game, which you probably do. And then, like I said, it's the first English game with a casual mode. The first game with casual mode is FE12, but that is the new Mystery of the Emblem. It's exclusive to Japan. And like I said earlier, casual mode is where units that die don't die. However, this feature, unlike Pair Up, exists in all the future games. And I think is going to be here to stay for, well, probably forever. I don't see it ever going away. Unless they continue to do more localizations, like they've recently done with Fire Emblem 1. But yeah, overall Awakening, super centralizing on Pair Up, to the point where it's incredibly difficult to go anywhere else because Pair Up doesn't exist. And I know it doesn't exist in Pair Ups, but I swear it's not the same. If you only intend to go forward in the series, like if you never intend to go backwards, like I mean I guess you could play, like if you never intend to play New Mystery of the Emblem or before, then I can get behind Awakening to a degree as a starting point. I think there's a better game to start with for going forward in the series. But if you only wanted to go forward, Awakening's not a bad place to start. Because a lot of the mechanics going forward relate directly back to Awakening. In most ways. Or if you really want to play Fire Emblem Fates for some reason, Awakening's a better game to start with, because it's got a lot more interesting story, so it's going to keep you engaged way better than any of the Fates games are. So that's the thing. And the mechanics are similar, despite Pair Up being different. They still have supports. They still have later game units being locked off by supports. They have like a lot of coincidence with them, for better or for worse. They do. But yeah, Awakening's got some upside. And finally, and the last game in this tier is Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light. Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light is Fire Emblem 1, and this is the game that was recently released. I believe, what, is it 5 days ago? 4 days ago? I'm recording this on the 8th, so 4 days ago it was released. So yeah, this game just came out. It just came out, in quotes. It obviously came out in 1990, back on the NES. It's not really received much of an overhaul outside of its text. Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light has the opposite issue of Three Houses. Three Houses has a ton of features that aren't transferable to anything else, that makes it really hard to play with, to play previous games. And like I mentioned earlier, not having mechanics to having mechanics is way easier. However, that is only true to an extent. That's true for when the features that are added in are not super core essential features that are required to play the game, right? The problem with Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light is that it doesn't have any of the quality of life things that were given over time. Most of these are not that big of a deal. Like, yeah, it sucks that I can't check the strength of my weapon, but like in general, I know the steel sword is going to hit harder than the iron sword, and the silver sword is going to hit harder than the steel sword. If I really need to kill something, I'll use the silver sword. If it's cool if something kills, but not the end of the world if it doesn't kill, I'll use my steel or iron sword. In general, that's how it works. And you can get away with just doing that, but it does suck. However, the big issue with this game is that it doesn't have one mechanic. And that is the pre-battle screen. I forget what it's actually called. I've always called it the pre-battle screen. When you go and initiate an attack in every Fire Emblem game, except for Fire Emblem 1, and I think Fire Emblem 2, I forget. I haven't played Fire Emblem 2 in like a really, really long time. Because Echoes is just a superior game. But in Fire Emblem 1, and every other game after Fire Emblem 1, or after Fire Emblem 2, because 3 has it, and beyond, I think, all have it. They have a screen that shows you what's about to happen. It shows your speed, it shows your opponent's speed, it shows how many times you're going to hit, it shows how much damage you do with a single attack, it shows how much HP you have and how much HP they have, and your chances of hit and dodge. Fire Emblem 1 doesn't have that, which means every single attack you make, you go in blind. You have no idea how much damage you're doing, nor how much damage is being done to you, until it's already happened. Which is really, really annoying as a tactics game, because how do you know what the right decisions are if you can't see the right decisions? It's got some other things that are janky and different. It doesn't have a magic stat. Trading doesn't exist in the way it does in other games. You give items instead. Staffs don't give EXP. So, all of those are weird things. You can't check enemy ranges, which is a pretty common thing in new games. All of those are pretty just normal, strange stuff that you would expect from an NES game. But they're just not. The no battle pre-screen is so obnoxious to deal with. Like, it's so bad. There's a reason I beat this game once and I'm never going to play it again. Like, it's honestly atrocious. And it makes it difficult for a casual player to play the game. A lot of casual players in today's day and age, they play the game and they're like, oh yeah, because it's got all the cool quality of life stuff that they're so used to. Going back and playing without it is super hard, and that's the thing. That's the thing. It's super hard. Not because the game is difficult, because you have no idea what you're doing every single time you tab. And that's the thing. So because of all that, and because of a lot of the weird and different stuff it has compared to the newer games in the series, and by newer I mean Game Boy Advance and onwards. In this instance, Game Boy Advance and onwards, I struggle to recommend it. However, it does have some upside over the other games. Like I said, it's easier to go from not having to having. So it's easier to go. So, like, obviously, if you start and you don't have the prep screen, and then you play a game that does have the prep screen, the pre-battle screen, you'll be like, oh, see, okay, this is cool. I like this. I'm here for it. And then it's way harder to go backwards. But that's the thing about Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light. But it's the real reason that it's not higher is the game that we're going to talk about 2 games from now. And next up is our tier right below the top tier. There's 2 games here. From here on out, I can recommend fairly confidently you can start with any of these games and get away with it. And you'd have a good experience. It's easy enough. It's enjoyable enough plot-wise. And they serve you well going forward or backwards enough, I think, in the series. And these next 2, I'd say, are tied, and then there's the top tier, which is the last 2 games in the series. And for starters, we have Fire Emblem, the Sacred Stones. A lot of people don't recommend necessarily to start with this game because it teaches bad habits. Grinding. I mean, what? No. Yeah, but it's got some things. Sacred Stones is very easy. Its story makes sense enough if you don't think about it. Really, it's just the plot of Endgame. There's a purple man trying to collect the stones. So it's kind of the same deal. It's basically just, Endgame, right? And Infinity War. Or whatever. It's pretty strange. It was pretty strange at the time. Because compared to a lot of the other games that were around, because it has an overworld map, it has grinding, it has respawning enemies, and it has split promotions. All of these are available in Awakening and onwards, except for like the I don't know, like all these are available, in Awakening and onwards, right? Echoes has all this stuff too, except for split. Well, it does have some split promotion. And and just like Birthright and Revelations, you can grind whenever you want to. While it's one of the GBA games, it definitely has a lot more comparison to work with than like the 3DS game, which makes it pretty transferable to them. And because it's a GBA game, it runs off Game Boy Advance mechanics, which means it's transferable to the other GBA games and the GameCube game, because it's pretty similar in design in many respects as well. So it's got really good transferability. Some of the best in the series, I'd have to say. You can go forward and you're going to be like, alright, we got some similar mechanics and some new stuff. Or you go backwards and it's like, oh yeah, I just kind of played this, but it's different levels with different characters. I follow. And that's really good. That's like really good. It's the only game that has that, which is super, super unique. And it's really easy, which is good for new players because they need it to be easy, because they're probably still going to get wrecked a little bit because they just don't know what they're doing. So you got all that, The problem with Sacred Stones is that it's a little too easy. Like it's really easy. And one in part because if you wanted to, you could just grind and you just win because it's like, oh yeah, let me just grind everyone to level 20 in the tower real quick and then I just win. I'm like, you could do that. I mean, that trivializes the entire game, and I think a normal person wouldn't, but you could. And then, like, in another wise, it's also because the enemies are so weak, you can learn some questionable habits and bad strategies in this game that aren't going to be good carried over to other games. Because in easy or normal mode, if the game's so easy, you can get away with stuff. In hard mode, I think this game actually has some real difficulty, and if you're not, play your game right, you could definitely come into some problems. But in easy or normal mode, you can so get away with anything. Like, this game's really easy in those two. It's so bad. I don't want to say anything more, because then it's going to get a little spoilery, but that's just the way it is. Sacred Stones, as a whole, solid to start with. It has the best transferability. If you have no idea where you really want to go, but you definitely want to play multiple games in the series, I think Sacred Stones is an okay place to start with. It doesn't have the best story, doesn't have the best gameplay. It's pretty easy, a little too easy at times. So that's Sacred Stones. Next up, we have Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon. Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon is the Nintendo DS remake of Fire Emblem 1, and I think in many respects it is just completely superior to to Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, right? It's got all the quality of life features, not all the quality of life features, but most of the quality of life features you've come to expect going forward. It's modernized to the new game fairly well, while still keeping somewhat true to the old game. For the most part, I think its difficulty is fair. I think it's mechanically very solid. It doesn't have very much. It's very bare bones. But like I mentioned earlier, that's a good thing. Not having is not a bad thing. It gives you better transferability to other games in the series because you don't have. And for the most part, that's true, and we'll get into why that's a little not true later. But, like, you don't have... What does this game really have? It has one mechanic. One really unique mechanic. And that's it. And I guess forging. But, like, it also uses the same forge that's in Awakening and Fates and New Mystery. So, how different is it really? Every game's forge is different, so... I guess that. It has unique forging. It has unique weapons in it. but like that's really just a different type of weapon. That's not a whole unique mechanic. And it's easy enough. It's not too easy. You can definitely get caught off guard if you're not careful. So it's not too easy. It does make you think. It makes you have to use strategy, which is good. That's what the game should do, even on normal mode. But it's easy enough that you can definitely get through it without too much trouble, except for the final boss. Final boss on normal mode, really hard. Even on all difficulties, it's really hard. But even on normal mode, that final boss will beat you up. Shadow Dragon also encourages not resetting, which is something that I appreciate. As if you lose too many units, you can get filler units, and those filler units they're pretty bad, but they're serviceable enough. Like, you can make them work if you lose too many units. So, you know, that's a thing that you can do as well. This game's got a few weird quirks in it. One is that it has chapters that are blocked off if you have too many units alive. So that's kind of dumb. Yeah, it's just kind of really dumb. There's a mod that gets rid of that, but I can't, you know, talk about that here. And then it also has reclassing. Not in the way that the newer games do it, where you have a second seal and you have to spend money. No, you can just outright reclass starting from Chapter 4. Every character in the game, except for the Lord, which is Marth, and the Ballisticians, can reclass, and I think the Dragons can't reclass, but everyone else can reclass into any other class in their class set, which is 4 to 5 other classes, depending on your class. It's actually insane. Like, no cap. Literally insane. It is Shadow Dragon's one mechanic, and it's one of the most interesting in the series. The problem is, it's nowhere else. So, it's got some issues, but I think it's a good game to start with. If you wanted to start from the ground up, and you didn't really care about the whole support thing that like the new games do, you just kind of want to play your tactical strategy game that takes place in medieval times, Shadow Dragon is the game for you, friend. And now, that takes us to our top 2 games. And honestly, I was going to put these in order, but they both have really, really strong strongs and one key flaw. So I'm going to put them as a tie. But, you know, you can start on either one of these two, and I'd say that you picked the right choice. I mean, you could start on the other two that I just talked about too, and I'd still say that you made a fine choice. But these two, the real deal. And the first one is Fire Emblem 7, otherwise known as Fire Emblem the Blazing Blade. The Blazing Blade. Is it Blazing Blade? It's either Blazing Blade or Blazing Sword, depending on who you ask. But I just call it Fire Emblem 7 because it's the 7th game in the series, and was originally called Fire Emblem with no subtitle. Just Fire Emblem when it first came out on the Game Boy Advance. Here, it was the first game to enter the English language, and because of that, it had it was designed specifically in mind. Its normal mode was designed entirely for beginners. It has an entire 10 chapters. First story arc and all is all tutorial designed to teach you how to play the game. And it's pretty good at that. It's not perfect. It's got some placement issues that are not optimal, but for the most part, it's pretty good. You know, very easy in the tutorial phase. You shouldn't be losing anybody. If you lose somebody, you can lose like one character in the tutorial phase, and I get it, but like if you lose anyone else, you're just an idiot. Or you're intentionally losing people, because I did that one time. I just wanted to see what would happen. But beyond the tutorial part, the first 10 chapters, the game's pretty easy. The real game starts in chapter 11. And it's pretty easy. It's not like Sacred Stone's easy, but it's pretty easy. See, I mean, you do gotta think about stuff, or else you will get hard punished. I know. I didn't believe that at first, and then I saw someone play the game, and it was their first time playing, and they got pretty hard punished for bad decisions. And I'm like, oh no, this game actually, it's got something in it. So it's difficult enough. It's not as hard as Shadow Dragon. It's harder than Sacred Stones. It's got a pretty solid blend of all that. But what's the problem? Why is it here? So I mentioned, it's got one key flaw. What's the key flaw? The key flaw is that the story is garbage. There is so many plot holes that don't make sense if you think about it even a little bit. So I recommend don't think about it, and you're fine. The other day, I've been streaming this game with Jokester every Thursday at 9. So the 10th, or what? Huh? So the 10th, and then next week, which would be the 17th, I think. Every Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you can hit your boy up on stream. I'll be with Jokester, and we're going to be playing, unless we specify otherwise in the prior to that. Hint, hint. You should. The hint, hint means you should go check us out. We're playing this game right now. What were we talking about? Oh, the problem. Yeah, the problem is the story sucks. On our stream, I literally just make fun of the story the whole time. Like, when I'm not playing the game and talking about the gameplay, we're just making fun of the story the whole time, because it's really bad. Like, there honestly is a part where the bad guy could have enacted his evil plan. He had all the pieces. Everything was literally set up, and he could have enacted his evil plan, and he just didn't until the main characters arrived to stop him. It's dumb, and the entire game feels like that. It's full of stuff that doesn't make sense, and everything else was unexplored. I like the game, but it is stupid. Anyway, that's Fire Emblem 7. It's bad story, great gameplay, nice tutorial for your first time, and easy enough. It'll still give you a challenge as your first time playing, but shouldn't be too much of a challenge to the point where you ever feel like quitting and giving up. Except on Dragon's Gate and on chapter 26. Those two chapters, I get it, bro. I do. Those two chapters, obnoxious. Especially if you don't know what you're doing. And even if you do, they can still be problematic. And finally, our final game here on the list is Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. Fire Emblem Path of Radiance came out on the Nintendo GameCube in I think 2005. And it was great. This game's so sick. It just does everything right. Its tutorials are optional. They're all optional. Obviously, I recommend it if you've never played the game before. They appear like on the screen, and then you click like the R button or something. I forget what button you click, but you click a button, and then it'll be like, and it pulls up the tutorials, and then you'll be like, ah, cool, I can look at all this stuff, right? Pretty simple tutorials. No biggies. You're fine. Easy money. So you got the quick tutorials that you can view if you want to, totally optional. You want to go in it alone for your first time? I respect your decision. Go for it, or you cannot, and it's all on you. However, even if you don't, I don't think this game is particularly tough. It is harder than Fire Emblem 7. I think as a whole, it's as hard as Shadow Dragon. Just the difficulty is dispersed differently. In Shadow Dragons, it's a lot more at the end, and in Path of Radiance, it's a lot more balanced game throughout in terms of difficulty. But about as hard. It's as hard as you can get, while I can still recommend it for a first time, without being too difficult. You will get punished for bad moves. You do have to space things out right, or else you will just die. You do have to be careful. It's tough, but it's not too tough. It teaches you about item management early on, before you get your convoy. So that's a nice little... That's subconsciously teaches you something, which is a nice little boon that the other games don't have. And really, it does everything right, gameplay-wise. Story-wise, same deal. It's coherent, it's sensible, it's enjoyable, and it's against racism. So, you know, everything we can all get behind, right? I like it. Great, solid story. Don't wanna, you know, a great, solid story. Don't want to spoiler anything, obviously. But really good in terms of an overall adventure. However, it's got one key problem. And I mentioned this earlier. That was availability. Every other game that I've talked about today is either available on your Switch, on your 3DS, or through the Wii U Virtual Console. And all of those are true, except for, or they're just not at all games that you want to start with. Radiant Dawn being the only one. Being the only other exception is Radiant Dawn. Path of Radiance only was released on the Nintendo GameCube, and for whatever reason, Nintendo never wants to release games that came out on the Nintendo GameCube. Like, seriously, when was the last time we had a GameCube? Like, we got Sunshine in part of 3D All-Stars, but outside of Sunshine, what was the last Nintendo GameCube game that was made by Nintendo that's seen a re-release? Because maybe it's just a game I don't care about, but I don't remember it. Oh, I guess it's Pikmin 2, right? On the Wii? Because I don't think the Wii U had any GameCube re-releases. And there was no Virtual Console things either. So that's the thing. The GameCube never gets anything remade. And because of this, Path of Radiance is incredibly expensive. Like, really expensive. More expensive than, like, any other GameCube game. It's super expensive. More expensive than any other Fire Emblem game. That's for sure. So, this is a game that I would recommend you emulate. If you're comfortable with, you know, Nintendo GameCube emulation, then I'd say that there is no better starting point than this game. If you're not comfortable with that, I recommend you go to Fire Emblem 7 or Sacred Stones or Shadow Dragon. Just because it's so expensive, I could never tell someone to buy a game that is like over $100+ that came out of the Nintendo GameCube in 2005. I just can't do it. I just could never. That's way too much money. But like I said, all the other games are new enough that you can buy on Virtual Console and Wii U. Those being 7, Sacred Stones, and Shadow Dragon. Or you just buy on the 3DS or the Switch, you know. As the one that just came out, Fire Emblem 1, and 3 Houses on Switch, and the others are on the 3DS. And everything else is Japan exclusive, so there you go, that's all the games. With the exception of Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, which are just... You'll want to emulate them if you want to play them. That's the thing. I think that's it. So all in all, review as a whole. Definitely do not start with, for any purposes, do not start with Conquest, Revelations, or Radiant Dawn. Don't start with, unless you're only going to play games future in the series, don't start with 3 Houses, Birthright, Awakening, or Echoes, unless you only intend to go forward. Actually, yeah, I guess that works. Actually, don't start with Birthright, period, actually. Don't start with Birthright, period. But if you only intend to go forward, you can get away with the other 3. Start with Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light if you want to experience it once and then never play it again. And then if you want to start and get into the series and you don't really know, I recommend Shadow Dragon. I recommend the Sacred Stones. I recommend Fire Emblem 7, and I recommend Path of Radiance. You can get away with all those, and I'd say that you made not a wrong. You made a right choice. All of them are good. Varying degrees of good, but they're all fair to start with. Yeah, that's it. That's my video on which one you should start with. Yeah, that's bye. Oh, also like the video and subscribe. I guess as a YouTube person I have to say that, right? That's a thing? Yeah? Alright, cool. Okay, now we're good. Thank you.